My plane crashed above the Pacific Ocean. We survived, but there's something terribly wrong. There's no one to blame for my son's death except myself. But then again, he's not exactly dead. As the plane was going through the storm, I knew that something wasn't right. Maybe if I had known then that the pilot had been up 3 days on his own special blend of cocaine and fentanyl, I would have insisted that we wait for a more qualified flyer. Yet, as my 8-year-old son and I boarded the small prop plane, everything had seemed fine. It looked to be in stellar condition from the outside look of it, and the pilot had seemed competent enough. Seemed. Hell, maybe he was competent. Just not when he hadn't slept in 3 days and had enough cocaine in his system for a small country. Are you sure that we shouldn't wait out the storm? I had asked him. I'm no expert by any means, but it looks worse than what they said. He glanced over towards the ominous dark reds and blues that stood facing us from the horizon. That little thing? He had answered back with a grin. Ain't nothing. Just stick with me, I'll have the two of you there before you know what hit you. He'd ruffled the hair on the top of my son Tommy's head quickly, and then opened the small door on the passenger's side of the plane. The turbulence had come in small spurts, and my son even seemed to enjoy it. At first. The beautiful view of the ocean was breathtaking, and helped dull the fear of the strange clouds above us. Oh, look, Dad! Are those sharks? I followed Tommy's eyes towards a group of shadows in the water that stood out about our 2 o'clock. Ah, maybe so, I replied back from next to him. A few minutes passed, and as the two of us sat together watching the swirling colours of the storm and the shadows below us, I couldn't help but smile. Though we were just at the start of our trip together, it was turning out to be just what I hoped. Ponding with my son. Time alone. A trip to bring the two of us together. Tommy was suddenly thrown violently against the dark green interior of the plane. My heart began to race desperately as I checked him for injuries, the plane beginning to drop up and down as if the physics that had kept an old aluminum box in the sky were being threatened by some greater force than science. Tommy! Oh, Jesus Christ, Tommy, are you alright? A small cut could be seen just below his left ear, and I grabbed a bandage from the emergency kit that I had seen earlier below our seat. I'm okay, Dad. And then we dropped. Fast! As we descended like a bullet, the pilot's once cocksure and careless attitude turned to terror, and he began to lose control of not only the plane, but himself as well. Checking from instrument to instrument rapidly, there seemed to be no rhyme, no reason for what he was doing. Just before we crashed into the bright blue of the Pacific, I tried to shield my son the best that I could. I wish I would have tried anything differently. And then we hit. Oh boy, did we ever hit. You ever see Castaway? That's how it happens. 1 second, everything is fine. And then the next, you're trying desperately to survive. When I came to, the cold water was already up to my neck and my son couldn't be seen. Without a second thought, I stuck my head underneath the surface, unclipped him from where he was sitting, and grabbed the only life jacket that I could find, and I pulled him from the wreckage. When we came up, I got us a few yards away from the plane and tried my best to check on my son. I knew that water had gone into his lungs, and all I could think of was to hold his head above the water and use my free hand to try and get him to cough up the fluid. Nothing seemed to work. But, as fate would have it, we wouldn't be floating long. An incredibly strong current pushed the two of us quickly under the yellowing clouds of the storm, and within a short time, I was carrying my son across a blanket of fresh white sand. I quickly performed CPR, and to my surprise and thrill, Tommy, he coughed up the water that had been drowning him, and he stared up at me, his blue eyes looking up innocently. I began to cry. What happened, Dad? I pulled him into my arms and I squeezed tighter than I ever had before. I squeezed so hard that he even coughed up what was left of the water in his lungs. That was 4 days ago, and there have been no signs of rescue since. Or at least, that's what I've told my son. You see, there's a bigger problem than rescue. That night, as we sat together around the fire that I'd made, my son told me that he just didn't feel quite right. I checked his forehead, which seemed colder than usual. I then checked his eyes, which seemed darker than usual. And I checked his pulse. His pulse. You see, that's the thing. Tommy doesn't seem to have a pulse at all. He's talking like normal and he isn't acting much differently, but he doesn't seem to have a heartbeat. In fact, I'm quite sure of it at this point. There's more too. His body is beginning to change. I haven't told him, but his skin is starting to turn a dark shade of blue. A corpse blue. I'm beginning to think that he really is dead. Well, at least some kind of dead.